I think sometimes they may be a pain in somebody's rear. As a matter of fact, one of them recently turned in a writ of mandamus to Kristen Nelson, and one day after we reported on that, it looks like she may be leaving. So I would suggest that the next time that somebody wants to mess with Christopher Strunk, they better think about whether they want to keep their jobs. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
When did you hear that she may be leaving?
Oh, that's the big news this morning.
Wow, so I was effective, huh?
Yeah, that's
But
why I'm
something
joking.
happened.
That's why I was joking with you. I said, don't mess with Christopher Strunk, because literally the day after you reported, the way they treated you and the way they considered you a threat because you simply did what the president asked, which was turned into a writ of mandamus showing the corruption in election rigging. And then basically you get kind of, muscled, and then bingo, she's gone. Well, we know why she's gone, because she's done nothing. Homeland Security is the head of all the intelligence agencies. Why isn't she stopping the caravan? Why didn't she stop the election rigging, which we told them all about ahead of time? And if you can't stop election rigging in America, then you're deaf, dumb, and blind, because there's so much going on. So anyway, Kristen, don't let the door hit you in the ass, because you really have not supported the Trump campaign and the Trump ideas and his entire administration. I'm sorry, she's not a good fit. So don't mess with Christopher Strunk. We also have on the line Eric Phelps, and Eric Phelps is a minister, and he's a friend of Christopher's, and they work together in doing some really amazing things. I don't know that we'll get to the things that they also do. They do many, many things, but a lot of legal type of work to help people really reclaim their citizenship. And so Eric is going to today, with Christopher Strunk, discuss the Jesuits and the Jesuit influence in America. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Pleasant to be with you, Douglas and Chris, and also with your listeners today.
It is a thrill because I love Jesuit bashing, and I've written a number of very long intelligence reports showing basically how Pope Francis, he's a Jesuit, he's a liberation theologist, he's an apocalyptic theologist. He's already said that the end of the Catholic Church has come. I have him quoted saying that Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad are the same people. I have him rewriting the Our Father. I have him changing every single doctrine in the Catholic Church. He just wrote a set of 12 books nobody knows about with the help of the Jesuit Curia, that group around him that determines, basically the ecclesiastical and the theological direction of the Pope. He wrote 12 books nobody knows about, but if you read them, you're going to find out there is nothing left. Exactly as I predicted. There will be nothing left of the Catholic Church when Francis I basically runs it ashore. And he's a Jesuit. Now, gentlemen, people really don't know who the Jesuits are, and I don't know which one of you want to handle kind of the historical perspective to introduce this, but that's what I have to say. I was a Jesuit. I'm so glad I got out. I didn't mean to get in. It was an accident. And I know that it's as bad as everyone says, and I may chime in with my personal experience, but I've already done that before. What I want to know from you two, expert historians, expert researchers on the Jesuits, you tell me every time I talk with you, Christopher, things about the Jesuits I didn't know about, and I was part of them for a while. So, gentlemen, tell us, who are the Jesuits, and what do they have to do with America, and do they still have control here in America?
I had my start first by dating a strict Vatican I Polish girl when I was in first year of college, and that was an experience. And that I'm a non-religious person and grown up as a red diaper baby, and I became an Eagle Scout, and I had to find a church where I could get a sign off on God and country, and that's so. With that done, I became an Eagle Scout at 12, and otherwise, my experience has been how the Jesuits, through the Culinary Institute of America up in Dutchess County, were involved in ripping off widows and stealing property. And I went to the Eastern District of New York to file a suit unrelated to that, but I met a Trappist who had left the Trappist order, a Cistercian, and he became a domestic relations law attorney after leaving the Trappist order, and became the librarian for St. John University. And he would invite me in and give me all the books to read, Malachi Martin, etc. The first book on the Jesuits I read was by Malachi Martin, off of the Trappist, the ex-Trappist librarian for the Eastern District of New York, who I think is no longer with us. But nonetheless, he and I were close friends, and all the time I was doing work at the Eastern District of New York. So, and then I met Eric in 2005 in regards to my work that I was doing on banning the Jesuits from the United States under the Logan Act, and I had a case in Eastern District in regards to that. So, but I defer to Eric's experience here.
Okay, in addressing Douglas's initial question, the Jesuits were started in 1534 by Don Ignatius Loyola of the House of Loyola in Spain. He was a Basque. He was an Aragon Templar, and he had connections to the Templars throughout Europe. And as a result of the Protestant Reformation, which I believe the Lord started with Martin Luther, I'm a Bible-believing, born-again Christian, I'm a Baptist, independent Baptist by distinction, that when Luther began the Reformation and got the Bible in the hands of the common man, where the common man could read it in his own language, this began the breaking of not only the spiritual power of the Pope, but also his temporal power. And the temporal power, as you know, concerns the doctrine that the Pope has the right to rule all nations, the governments of all nations. And this first began with Pepin the Great in 756, when he gave the Pope temporal power. He was the father of Charlemagne, of course. So the temporal power and the spiritual power of the Pope was being broken because, as we read in the Bible, there's one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. And so if there's only one mediator, you don't need a pope, you don't need a priest, you don't need any of these people that act as go-between between you and God. There's only one. And so when this happens, then many Catholic people became saved. They were born again, and they left the Catholic Church, and hence, as a result, they were leaving the temporal power of the Pope. And certain countries that did this were the United Provinces, after they fought an 80-year civil war to break the temporal power of the Pope over the Holy Roman Emperor that attacked them. And then we have Cromwell's Commonwealth, and we have the American creation of the United States. All this is a result of the Protestant Reformation and the Bible in the hands of the common man. So as this began to happen in Europe, in 1534, Ignatius Loyola started a group called the Knights of the Virgin Mary. And the Knights of the Virgin Mary would later be called the Society of Jesus, or as surnamed by the great John Calvin, the Jesuits. And so their purpose was twofold, as you can read about this in Wiley's great work, The History of Protestantism. He tells you that the purpose of the Jesuits was number one, to take Jerusalem from the Saracens. And the second purpose was to destroy the Protestant Reformation and restore the temporal power of the Pope over all the nations who had become Protestant and had left the power of the papacy, especially the Holy Roman Empire. So this is the purpose of the Jesuits. And Thomas Sherman, who was the son of burn-em-up General Tecumseh Sherman, was a powerful Jesuit in the early 1900s. He was an advisor to Theodore Roosevelt. And he said the purpose of the Jesuit order is to fight and down Protestantism. So therefore, the Jesuits have declared war on every historically Protestant nation and Baptist people, as has been done here in America. And this war has been set out in their Council of Trent that was written from 1545 to 1563, when Diego Lainez oversaw that council. And in that council, they put 125 curses on every Protestant, on every Baptist, those who believe in justification by faith alone, those who do not believe in transubstantiation, those who believe that you do not need to be baptized to be saved. And there's 125 curses placed upon us and all the Protestant peoples of Europe and wherever else they went to. So the Jesuits are in an active warfare And this warfare includes killing Protestant and Baptist peoples as well as anybody else that get in their way. And such tremendous wars that they've ignited have been the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, when they killed half the population of Germany. You have the terrible Dutch Civil War that lasted for 80 years, and God intervened and gave the Netherlands their liberty. We have the Puritan Revolution that lasted for 10 years in England, God intervening and bringing Cromwell to power. After he was put in power for 5 years, he was poisoned by his Dr. Bate. We have the American Revolution, as it was a result of King George III, who was controlled by the Jesuits and was just taking the rights of the English freemen here. And so the Jesuits are in constant conspiracy against the nations of the world to submit them to the temple power. They were behind the Second 30 Years' War, which started in 1914 and ended in 1945, where they totally destroyed the Protestant Reformation out of Germany. Prussia ended in 1946, as well as carrying out the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust, which was in excess of 6 million Jews, more like probably 6.5. And they're planning the same thing here in America. And I show in my class and in my course that I teach that the Jesuits took over the United States of America on March 9th, 1933, with the declared passing of the Emergency Banking Relief Act on March 9th, 1933, and then shortly thereafter, later on in the evening, FDR comes out with this Proclamation 2040, confirming the state of national banking emergency and state of war out of the War Powers Act, the Trading with the Enemy Act, backing those two acts. And hence, we have been under an emergency war power military government since March 9th, 1933, and the courts have been sitting in emergency war power military jurisdiction since the damnable Erie decision of April 25th, 1938, when they did away with federal general common law, and then 5 months later put upon us the wicked federal rules of civil procedure. So we've been under military government since 33, military jurisdiction since 38, and that's why every federal district court is flying military colors, but no judge will ever answer you if you ask him, are we sitting in emergency war powers? Because that was done to me in Allentown, Pennsylvania, by James Noel Gardner, a federal district judge there, and among other times. So the Jesuits have taken everything. They own all the people. They own all the land. They own all the chattels, all the movables, all legal titles registered on a state level. The commander-in-chief holds as his legal title because it's all been seized as booty of war. The people are enemy belligerents, and they use us, and they use their Federal Reserve Bank to finance a huge military-industrial complex around the world to submit all nations to military dictators who are loyal to the Pope of Rome. So this is their grand design. They use America as the foundation and the enforcer of their new world order that they started with FDR in 1933. And they're preparing right now to have another huge two-front war in the Middle East and in the Far East. And I maintain in the end they're going to betray our soldiers. We're going to have a huge Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. It will occupy this country, and it will be the end of the historic white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist Reformation, English and American.
Well, that was probably the best rendition of the Jesuits I've ever heard in that short amount of time. Now, can you tell us about the mechanisms of the way that reaches into America? Because what you've said is right, and it may be a shock to many, many people to realize that these wars are planned by a church that hides behind the rhetoric of peace and love and Jesus Christ, when peace, love, and Jesus Christ have nothing to do with the wars and the killing you just mentioned. And those are all real. I'm a historian. Those cannot actually be argued. And what you just said about your supposition of what's about to happen, we have said exactly the same thing. You can actually take the 17 Intelligence Community report called The Paradox of Progress. They predict exactly what you just said. Hillary was going to drop a bomb on Damascus. That's the last sign for the Muslims that the Mahdi has arrived. Well, that would also be the beginning of Armageddon, because once you destroy Damascus, and Hillary literally said after Trump bombed Syria, I would have bombed all 6 of the airstrips, and we have to go after the man where he lives. In other words, she said she was going to bomb Damascus. If she bombs Damascus, the people of the book, the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians who are waiting for apocalypse, particularly through the Jesuits who are apocalyptic theologists, they want an apocalypse, and they want it now. Francis has so much as said those very words. So I think you're quite right. So tell us, how does the mechanism of, besides the 28 universities and colleges that we know, if you want to get really indoctrinated and you want to have pure Jesuit brainwashing, simply go to Georgetown. Matter of fact, who gets into Washington, D.C. without going through Georgetown or some other Jesuit university, right? I mean, it's the best brainwashing in the world. 172 Jesuit universities throughout the world have brainwashed, 111 nations. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the most powerful propaganda machine, military machine ever created in history, and it's come and it's done what you just said. Why can't we kick them out of America? Is there a hope of finding their mechanism and ending it?
Yes, I believe there is. I believe the first mechanism is there needs to be a great awakening. In other words, people need to truly repent and believe the gospel that Christ died for their sins according to the scriptures, was buried and rose again, which is the gospel of 1 Corinthians 15, the gospel that Luther preached, the gospel that Calvin preached. And as a result, we now are saved, we're in Christ, and we have the power by the Spirit of God to resist the devil, who is energizing all top Jesuits. This is truly a spiritual warfare, but it always manifests itself in physical flesh and blood rivalry. And so that's the first thing that I call for, a great awakening, a return to the Reformation Bible, a return to the AV 1611 King James English Bible, or for German people, a return to the Luther Bible of 1525. So we have to get back to the real Word of God, the real Bibles, and then we have to begin to denounce the Jesuit order based upon what they've done in history, and their 8 agent provocateurs, and those provocateurs primarily in this country today is the Democratic Party. I teach that no man can be a Christian man and believe the Bible and be a Democrat. That's impossible. And I come from Democratic parents. I was a red diaper baby too. My grandmother and grandfather, my paternal side, were card-carrying communists. I know all about communism, atheism, and God-hating and hating the Bible. So the Democrats today are the embodiment of everything blasphemous, everything evil, everything anti-Reformation, everything anti-America. And the Democrats always start the wars. Hence, that's why they're banging the drums against Putin and Russia. And in the Middle East, as you say, they always start the wars. So the Jesuits control matters through the graduates of their major universities, like Leon Panetta, the graduate from, Santa Clara County University, and Billy Clinton, the graduate from Georgetown, Lyndon Baines Johnson, a graduate from went to Georgetown for 1 year. They have all their Georgetown, Fordham, grads like G. Gordon Liddy, and a host of others from their universities, and then they put them to man places within their empire. And their empire includes the Federal Reserve Bank, then the major Class A stockholding banks like the J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, and so on, Goldman Sachs, all of them run by the Knights of Malta, like Jeffrey T. Biasi, who was a High Knight of Malta and a Knight of the Constantinian Order, and also a super powerful individual at Goldman Sachs. Nobody ever makes the connection of the Knights to Goldman Sachs. It's all Jew, 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 because obviously there's a Jewish name to it. So they put their people in the big banks, the big commercial banks. They put their people in the Federal Reserve Bank, so they control all the financing and all the public credit that's issued, so they can then invest in whatever they want to and create a world that they want financially. Then they also control the military, with people like Joe Dumford, who is the head of the Marine Corps, very devoted Irish Roman Catholic, subject to the Jesuits. And then you have others that are Jesuit trained and in their joint use of staff and so on. So they control the military. If you please go talk to her until I finish. And they control the military, they control the finances, they control academia. They finance the universities that continue their ideology, like Yale and other major universities. So then they also control high-level Scottish Rite Freemasonry, because the Jesuits wrote all the degrees of the Scottish Rite from the 4th degree to the 33rd degree, and then beyond to the 90th degree, of which Aleister Crowley was of that rite, the Rite of Mizraim. But they control all the Masonic orders, Grand Orient, Scottish Rite, B'nai B'rith, you name it. They control them, and then their agents in those orders man certain places of power, like Chucky Schumer, Henry Kissinger, all these high Masons and Knights. So through the Knights of Malta, through high-level Freemasonry, through of every branch, through this Council on Foreign Relations out of New York, and then they have a certain amount of their papal court Jews, and these Jews are busy serving the papacy, betraying their own Hebrew, Jewish, Israelitish people into making people believe it's all the Jews, 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 to justify an anti-Jewish fury that will end in the roundup of every Jew in America and Canada and sending them to the some 600 concentration camps that are being prepared for them, among others. So they have all this control in these various arenas, and of course they control the press. Without the press, they could have never pulled this off. And I mean the press, both the right, quote-unquote, and the left. Of course, we don't believe in that. It's all from the top down. But the Jesuits run Rupert Murdoch out of Fox News, and the Jesuits run CNN and MSNBC with that Irish Roman Catholic Lawrence O'Donnell. So they control every facet of any sort of place to address or to come back with relief. And so I maintain the only thing to do is we have to have some kind of an Oliver Cromwell. We have to have some sort of a temporary military dictator to kick them out, to completely purge their influence in our economy, in our academia, in our press, and then to help to restore some sort of historic, constitutional, limited government. The Emergency Banking Relief Act must be repealed immediately, and when that happens, then constitutional civilian government would be restored, or Trump needs to repeal the Proclamation 2040. If he does that immediately, civilian government, constitutional government would be restored. And so these kinds of things, these critical points, need to be attacked, and that's how I say it. And of course the Jesuits need to be absolutely expelled from the United States under the Logan Act, and it ought to be a capital offense to be a Jesuit, because these people are soldiers. Napoleon called them soldiers. He called the Jesuit general a general in charge of an army, and they want universal power. You can read this in the book on the life of Napoleon, the memoirs of Napoleon, written by one of his generals when he was at St. Helena, and General Montalon. And so they have to be expelled. They've been expelled from every other country. France expelled them 8 times. Britain expelled them at least 4. Russia expelled them for 100 years, from 1820 to 1922. After the Jesuits pulled off the Bolshevik Revolution, they were readmitted. They've been expelled from China. They've been expelled from Japan for 200 years. We need to expel them here in America. They've never been expelled, and they hide under the guise that it's freedom of religion. No, it's not religion. It's subversion. It's a military army under the mask of religion, and they are at the top, Satanists, and a little bit below, all atheists.
Now, Eric, you are preaching to the choir, and I've never heard anybody say a clearer set of mechanisms through which the Jesuits work. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear to people. It's much more insidious than what he's saying. That through the brainwashing of these universities and Catholic schools and Catholic high schools, they literally target young men who then they abuse for the rest of their lives. And if you say, well, wait a second, going to Georgetown isn't going to brainwash someone. No, we're talking about the people who have been through their entire life brainwashed and controlled and literally abused. And I can name more. I might as well. Look at what Kavanaugh said in his first acceptance speech when Trump put his name up to be Supreme Court Justice. He spent the longest time of his entire speech thanking the priest that it was in the front row. He didn't even thank his wife, but he thanked that priest so much that it was disgusting, and it was so obvious to anyone who's dealt with a lot of abuse like I have, being a superintendent and principal for many years, decades. Sorry, we're looking at someone who is still controlled by their childhood abuse, who is now in the Supreme Court. And so when we're talking about this isn't the type of brainwashing, this isn't just getting Catholic ideas in your mind. No, 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 no. This is about subversion until they literally take away your ability to think clearly based upon what they teach in the universities. Catholic universities do not teach Christianity. I know. I was there. I taught at University of Detroit. I taught at Mercy College. I've taught at Rockhurst. I've taught at St. Louis University. I've taught at a bunch of them, whole bunch of them, right? They're not Christian.
And just remind the listeners that St. Louis University is Jesuit, University of Detroit Mercy is Jesuit, so you've been in the apex of power, academically speaking.
Regent, in Denver, all over the place. And then I was assigned, like a soldier, to work underneath an older Jesuit, and we worked together to try to figure out what this particular stream of spirituality that I've studied, called anthroposophy, what the Catholic Church might do with that. In other words, we were sent in, like paratroopers, to go in and conquer the enemy. And yes. I thought it was all very naive. I was very naive, and I thought it was all okay, because the Catholic Church just wanted to know if there's a new type of education that could be used, or a new type of educational pedagogical tools, or is there a new type of spiritual insight that the Catholic Church might need to take into consideration? So I studied those things, made reports on them, and then when I realized what I was in, I had to get out because I could see where this was going, and basically it's exactly as you've described. Now, going back, Henry Kissinger has run...
Just one question, Douglas. Were you professed at the third vow?
Yes, I had,
yes,
but in a very extraordinary way.
But not the fourth vow. Not
no.
the fourth vow, just the third vow.
And of course, we used the modern vows. We didn't use the old vows that say you can kill people and that you are pre-forgiven. The old Jesuit vows literally said you can go kill for the Pope and you are pre-forgiven. You are forgiven before you kill, and it doesn't matter how many you kill because you're doing it for the Pope, and their leader is called the Superior General, and it's called the Society, but Society means company. It literally was a military organization built by a military leader who had his leg shot off, and then he went to Jerusalem and he said, look at jihad. Jihad is beautiful. How are we going to counteract jihad? So literally the Jesuits completely subsumed jihad, in my opinion, and they've been using it on all those people you just mentioned. And they also looked at the Jews and they said, look at the pogroms. Look what the Jews were told. Kill every man, woman, child, kill the animals, knock down all the buildings, and salt the ground. And do not, under any circumstances, mix breed with anybody. You keep pure. Do not have children with anybody but Hebrews, right? So they learned that from the Muslims. Ignatius of Loyola learned that from the Muslims. He learned that from the Jews. And then he learned the worst part of the militarism of Catholicism. And we have to remember that the Pope at one time was a general of his own army, and he went out and killed people. And when he was asked, how do we know if they're Christian or not? Kill them all. God will know.
That's right.
That's
right. That's a Marine saying. And by the way, the Marine Corps of the United States was patterned after the Jesuit order. And it's a brotherhood, as the Jesuit order is, and the Jesuits being called the Company. They have a magazine called Company, and that's exactly why the CIA was named the Company. It was completely patterned after the Jesuit order.
The SS was built upon the Jesuit order, and they said no one learned how to control the world better than the Jesuits. Now, Jesuits control the Vatican Bank, the most corrupt bank in the world, but they control through influence. And now I want to go back to the Council on Foreign Relations. This is what a lot of people don't get. Henry Kissinger has determined our foreign policy since he joined the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, please correct me on this, gentlemen. I believe that the Council on Foreign Relations was hosted by a Jesuit to begin with, paid for by the Rockefellers and their lawyers and other, the big, basically the robber barons. And the Council on Foreign Relations, up until Trump, controlled all of our foreign policy, which basically meant who we're going to drop bombs on, who we're going to be at war with, and that is strictly a Jesuit organization connected to a British Jesuit organization, if I'm not mistaken. So, can you tell me about that?
International Affairs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Royal Institute for International Affairs, now called the Chatham House, started in 1919. CFR was started 2 years later. in 1921. But no doubt, the American Pope at the time, who was James Cardinal Gibbons, was the overseer of the founding of the CFR, and the CFR has been greatly, is totally overseen by the Archbishop of New York City, and Joseph A. O'Hare was a high Jesuit of the Fourth Vow. He was the president of Fordham, and he is a CFR presider, just as David Rockefeller was, as also was Peter G. Peterson, and Peter G. Peterson was a Knight of Malta in charge of Blackstone Group and a huge banking cartel. But Henry Kissinger is a Knight of Malta. He was a dear friend of Jack Valenti. Jack Valenti was another Knight of Malta. He was in charge of Hollywood and what got put in Hollywood and what was censored out. Jack Valenti also participated in the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, because he oversaw Lyndon Baines Johnson take his oath on a Roman Catholic missile on Air Force One after they murdered a decent and anti-Pope President John F. Kennedy. So yes, all the Knights of Malta are very much involved in this, but we cannot forget that Kissinger is a Knight of Malta, subject to the Pope. And when I went to Cyprus many years ago, I interviewed this young lady there. She was 18 or 19. And she said, we call Henry Kissinger Henry Killinger in Cyprus. He was the one that orchestrated the Turkish invasion in 1974, which killed thousands of us. So that's what they call him in Cyprus.
Tell us about the Knights of Malta historically, because people might not understand that there's been a war between the Jesuits, the Knights of Malta, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre, and there's been this historic battle, and now the Jesuits have won because they're not only in control of the Knights of Malta, and they don't only have a liberation theologist, Jesuit leader, the Superior General Sosa, he's been responsible for the death of tens of thousands, exactly like Francis. I mean, if anyone just looks at their history, I don't know why they put criminal murderers in charge of the Catholic Church, in charge of the Jesuit order, and now the Pope Francis got rid of the previous head of the Knights of Malta and installed someone that was more of his ilk. And so now basically the Jesuits control the whole thing.
That's correct. He relieved Matthew Festing, an Englishman or Scotchman of the Knights of Malta. That's right. But, so the Knights of Malta, they were started as the Hospitallers. And they were started in approximately 1048. They're the ones that led the First Crusade, that took Jerusalem from the Muslims in 1099. And then they are later run out of what became the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Muslims in 1291 with the Mamluks. And then the Knights were driven from Acre to Rhodes, and then from Rhodes to Malta. They ultimately were suppressed by the Pope in 1768, and in 1798 Napoleon went to Malta, stole all their treasures and weapons for their invasion into Egypt for the Battle of Cairo, when the Jesuits used Napoleon and his advisor Abbé Sieyès to kill all the Mamluks, the bodyguards of the Sultan. So they never forget. And hence, so the Knights of Malta, then at that time, they went to Russia. They were attacked by Napoleon and the Jesuits. And so they entered a secret deal in Russia. And after the Napoleonic Wars, they come back and they reassume power. But since that time, the Knights of Malta have been absolutely submitted to the Jesuit order. And they ran Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution. They had their headquarters there in Russia that later became the head of the KGB. So you have the Knights in Russia and the Knights in America working together to foment the Bolshevik Revolution. And so the Knights today are at least apparently openly right-wing, but secretly they're used by the order to influence both the right and the left.
And of course, they're the largest insider trading group in the world. All the nobility, the current monarchy, the ex-monarchy, the black monarchy, the richest people in the world. I've looked into this because a friend of mine, one of the richest people in the world, was invited in, and they were Jewish, and they said, "But Douglas, how can this be? This is blowing my mind. Why would I take a vow of fealty as a Jew to the Pope?" And I said, "Oh, you do want to do this." And so, Christopher, can you tell us about the American Knights of Malta, which I didn't even know about until you mentioned it to me, and they certainly have a tremendous control of America.
Well, I'd have to start in the 1907 specie panic, where gold and silver were essentially under the essentially banks could not conduct legitimate general accepted accounting principles and went into an emergency situation where they were doing interbank lending with notes, and that which was unconstitutional. What occurred is that Aldrich, who was the Rockefeller family member, got together with Vreeland, and as a congressman, the Aldrich-Vreeland Act was passed in 1908, essentially said for 20 years there can be an emergency back and forth creation of hypothecation of paper within the system without the use of gold or silver, and that as long as that emergency maintained, that change in general accounting principles was changed, and that ended up with Jekyll Island in the 1912 Federal Reserve Act, which was only to be for 20 years, and that it was to expire at the end of 20 years as long as that they could rein in the emergency, etc. And with the accession of Harding into office and stop the Americans from becoming a member of the League of Nations, he became president, the first one who would actually become a president directly from the Senate, who had worked with Bora and Lodge, and that he essentially ended World War I directly in July of 1921, which thereafter followed the creation of the Council on Foreign Relations. But so you have a Harding then leading to Coolidge and the Roaring Twenties, and essentially everybody was doing so well that they said, well, it looks like this interbank lending and this paper is doing just fine. Coolidge essentially got rid of the national debt, and what occurred is that the banks put forward what was called the McFadden Act. The McFadden Act in 1927 was modeled based upon the Knights, the American Knights, being created at the same time. Is that the American Knights were created, split from the European Knights of Malta, where they would maintain control of the banking and industrial structure of the United States to maintain the Roaring Twenties and to protect us from a perpetual Federal Reserve. So that McFadden Act made the 20-year temporary Federal Reserve, which was to expire in 1933, permanent, only under the situation where there would be no fraud. Lots of luck. But the point is that the McFadden, yes. Yeah, and right. So the point, one of the important nights was put in place after the Lateran Treaty was initiated by Taki Venturi, the General Secretary of the Jesuits, who controlled Mussolini.
That's right.
The reparation was given to the Vatican, which all of the holdings were taken away by the red shirts, by Garibaldi, who is actually living on Staten Island in New York to an Irish lass, and he was the one that Lincoln, as a step back, Lincoln wanted to put him in charge of the Union Army. It just went through and kicked ass in South America, and he was recouping, but he declined. He says, no, I've got to go straighten out Italy, and he went there working with the Emmanuels out of Sardinia. But I step back into this history. The whole point of the Lateran Treaty was to initiate the give back $99 million in gold to the Vatican, which they turned around and put it in the hands of J.P. Kennedy, who was sitting on the stock exchange, and he essentially called margins. He destroyed my grandfather's. He took away my grandfather's farm, which I'll never forget. And my grandfather was a really crabby Episcopal who. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is,
But if I might add something, Chris. Yes,
yeah.
right. Joe Kennedy was the chief Irish Roman Catholic short seller of stock on Wall Street. There were three of them, Ben Strong, Kennedy, and one other, and they're all named by Curtis Dahl in his great book, FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law. So absolutely, and then FDR has made a Knight of Malta as a result of this. He's going to be the first head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, so the Jesuits can control all the stocks, and then he's going to be appointed as ambassador to St. James by that 32nd degree apostate Protestant Freemason Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So they're all working together.
That's beautiful. So that's the American Knights of Malta, and people don't even know they exist. And if you told somebody that the Jesuits have control of our economy, they would tell you you're a conspiracy theorist unless they just heard the facts that you just told them. And so we have their penetration into our military, into our religion, into our education, into all of our government agencies, into our economy. And unfortunately, this is what I'm going to suggest, and I want to hear what you two think about this, because you're both inclined towards these things, legally thinking these ways. Is it possible that we can kick all the Catholics out of the country because of the $4.5 billion they have had to pay in admitting the pedophilia cases that have come to court? Now, there are over $5 billion in other lawsuits right now pending in America. Those are not even being addressed. We're not looking at the ones around the world either. But here in America, it's come out that this is a monopoly of pedophilia. This is racketeering. This is using your tax-exempt status to be one of the most evil, basically, corporations on the face of the earth. And under the tax-exempt status, they also then, remember, 184 supposed Catholic organizations receive, what is it in America? Well over 100, it used to be over $100 billion a year to place refugees, and then all the refugees come up missing. That's the way the Pope makes his money. That's why he's into open borders. That's why he wants to worship refugees. That's right. It's exactly insane. Right. We need to kick them out. Can we kick them out, gentlemen? Can we kick them out? The whole organization.
Well, I believe we can kick out all the agents of the Pope. The Roman Catholic people, remember, there's at least 70 million Roman Catholics in America. So they don't know anything about the temporal power of the Pope. No one ever taught them that. So the brotherhood of the priests, the archbishops, the bishops, the cardinals, they need to go. The Council for the Catholic bishops in Washington, D.C. has to go. The papal nuncio has to go, who tells the president what to do out of Rome. It's a brotherhood of political power, so they absolutely have to go. And this is why in England for many years Roman Catholics couldn't vote. This is why in the Netherlands they couldn't vote, because the people running the Netherlands, generally Protestants, knew that if they were going to vote, they would vote in this Catholic brotherhood that would take over the country and destroy the Reformation and free government. So yes, they do have to go. If they're a member of a brotherhood that's taken an oath to a foreign king, they have to go. And the Pope is a foreign king. Every archbishop, every cardinal, every bishop takes an oath to the Pope as a political head, as the king of Rome.
And
so yes,
and
they have to go, or they have to renounce the temporal power.
Yep, Jesuits
and they
take an
vote
extra
in that
vow.
election.
Mm-hmm.
They vote in the election. The cardinals vote, and therefore, when you vote in a foreign country, you are essentially renouncing your own American citizenship.
That's right.
Wow.
And the other thing is that they're the ones, as you said, Douglas, they're bringing in all the alien Roman Catholic invaders, Hispanic invaders. This has been their purpose since 1870s. As you can read in the great work, The Papacy and the Civil Power, by R.W. Thompson, he tells you the Jesuits have purpose to Latinize our southern border, namely Catholicize it, with as many invaders that they possibly can, because they're not immigrants. Immigrants go to a country and they renounce their previous citizenship. They're no longer a Russian or no longer a Frenchman. They become an American. These people are soldiers, and they've come here to take back America. This is the Aslan movement, and they tell us to go back to New England. This is an invasion. And Trump has done exactly the right thing by sending down 15,000 troops to stop them from coming in.
Now, I want to add something here because it's not understood. You know, the Inquisition that was run by Torquemada under Ferdinand Isabella was more of a financial accounting, and that those soldiers who were not taxable, who were Muslims, were converted into the conquistadors. Basically, they were sent into South and Central America under what later became under the control of the Jesuits, and that they have as a culture, a Muslim culture of pull the root. In other words, it's machismo is pull the root Muslim culture, where the women are essentially enslaved, and their mentality, if you look at MS-13 as a cult, it is a pull the root mentality, which is strictly a jihadist Muslim, and that came out of Torquemada, out of Spain.
And
it's not fully understood.
It's not just Torquemada. Yeah, it's not just Torquemada. That was the alignment between the Templars and the Assassins when they were in their Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. Because remember, there was no persecution of the Muslims in the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. So the Templars, the Knights Templars, and the Assassins were working together, and the Knights Templars imbibed many of the Assassins' doctrines. And so that also was a part of that. But yes, it's an invasion of North America. It's a flat-out North invasion. Bring as many Hispanic Roman Catholics as you can in here. Bring as many Muslims as you can in here. Bring as many black Muslims out of Somalia and other places, and settle them in historic white neighborhoods like they've done in Tennessee for the forced miscegenation, the race mixing, the historic white culture, because part of the Jesuit attack is to destroy white nations that were historically Protestant. And that's the real reason behind the evil civil rights movement. We have the head of Notre Dame who wrote the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so that's their real game. They don't care about the blacks. They care about destroying the Reformation. And only historic white nations, armed and with patriotic leaders reading the Bible, ever broke the temporal power. So that's what they're behind with that.
And it's liberation theology when it's preached by the Jesuits, who are the most effective at it, which is Marxism. It's sheer outright communism, and it's not Christian communism either, folks. It is the kind of communism. Remember that the Catholic Church is always on the side of the winner, whether it be Mussolini, Hitler, Franco, whoever does the Russian, doesn't matter. They're always on the side of the winners. I want to ask you, gentlemen, another question. How come Cardinal Dolan is so powerful?
Because he's the Archbishop of New York City. If you read the book, John Cardinal O'Connor, the Archbishop of New York is given the title, the Archbishop of the Political Capital of the World by John Paul II. That's his title. That's why the CFR is in New York.
So basically, that's outright kowtowing to a foreign king, which is the Pope.
Absolutely. The Pope is a foreign king. He has a throne in the Vatican. It's called the throne of the King of Rome. I have it in my book.
Chris, can we legally kick all these people who've taken these vows that Eric has made so clear, that are part of the Catholic Church, for the human trafficking, for the murder, for the pedophilia, for the theft, for the tax evasion, for all of the crimes that are still to this very day going on with the Catholic Church? Is there a way that we can legally take action against them, take away their tax status so that they don't have to pay taxes, and basically make them responsible for breaking the laws that they've broken, that for some reason they don't have to answer to, but you or I would? So is there a way that we can go after all of them at once with the lawsuit?
Well, I'm a realist and a pragmatist at the same time, like Trump is, and certainly his executive orders would be sufficient were we to have a fully American patriotic military and a court system that work. We neither have that. The court system does not exist in this country.
That's correct.
And that we maintain an administrative process, the fringe on the flag business, but that's real. And I as I was saying last night in that interview on what I'm doing in regards to the 17 intelligence agencies and how we reestablish the Monroe Doctrine against foreign influence into the hemisphere. And I pretty much lay out that we've got to unite those countries who were subjugated by the Jesuits and the Vatican for a lot longer than we ever had. We started in the 1600s, where they were suffering much earlier, and that they have a history, as Garibaldi made clear, that to try to overthrow it was Garibaldi overthrew the Vatican. All right, he seized all the property with Emmanuel and the Sardinians. Okay, so that is a model, Douglas, and I look at history as a model because I'm not smart enough, other than I know how to connect the dots. Okay.
I have to go, but here is what I recommend. I recommend to do exactly what the King of Spain did. The King of Spain decided to suppress the Jesuits out of all the Spanish holdings in South America and also out of Spain. I have this in my book. And so what he did was he and his right-hand man, Aranda, they put together all secret documents that these packets would go to every viceroy in South America. And in this packet was a note. And when they opened the packet, there was another packet. And it said, open at such and such a time, such and such a day, such and such a month. If you open this before this time, you will be executed. And so, 8:30 at night, all the viceroys in South America and other places with their Spanish holdings, they open it up. And in this order, they ordered to order all the Jesuits to the port and to send them back to Civita Vecchia. And this is how Spain formally expelled the Jesuits from all their holdings. It was a surprise. The Jesuits were totally taken back. There was nothing that they could anticipate. And I say this is how to do it here. There has to be all of a sudden one night Trump signing an executive order demanding their roundup, incarceration, and